Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from Mr. Alan Whyte, who was employed by J.S. Wright at the time with which we are concerned. That's right, Ms. Grange, I think?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Right.
Could we call Mr. Whyte?
Yes, if Mr. Whyte's there, would you ask him to come in, please? Good morning, Mr. Whyte.
Good morning.
I understand you're going to make the affirmation.
That's correct.
Well, then, could I ask you, please, to repeat the words on the screen?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, do sit down and make yourself comfortable, please.
Thank you.
There's water there if you want it, and we'll leave that to you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, can you please give the inquiry your full name?
Mr. Alan Whyte.
Thank you. And thank you very much for coming today to assist the inquiry with its investigations. It is very much appreciated.
Thanks for being invited.
I will be asking you the questions today. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm saying, please just ask me to repeat the question or I'll put the point in a different way. And if you can keep your voice up so that the transcriber who's sitting to your right can take a clear note, that would be fantastic. Now, you've provided 2 witness statements for the inquiry. If I can take you to the first statement on the screen, this is JSW 401892. There's that statement, and if we go on to page 34, we can see at the bottom it's dated the 26th of October 2018, and is that your signature?
It is.
And have you read that first statement recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I can.
Thank you. And if we can pull up now your second statement at JSW 407201. There's the second statement. And if we go on to page 6, we can see it's dated the 21st of December 2020. Again, have you read that statement recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that the contents are true?
I can.
Thank you. Have you discussed the evidence you're going to give today with anyone before coming here this morning?
No.
Thank you. Now, I want to start by asking you some questions about your background, including your qualifications and experience. If we look at paragraph 8 of your first witness statement on page 1, here you set out some of your experience, and you tell us that from December 2015 you were a senior contracts engineer at JS Wright, and before that you were a contracts engineer for them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you just explain what a contracts engineer does?
I'd be the go-to person on site for our client.
Yes.
And I'd be looking at the package of works that we need to deliver. At the time, I'd have a hand in procurement of items of plant materials and also bringing on subcontractors, especially some subcontractors.
Yes, thank you. And how much of a difference was there between the role of a contracts engineer and a senior contracts engineer?
Not a great deal of difference, but it was really a title that I was given to differentiate from other people that were doing the role.
Yes.
I probably had a little bit more responsibility because I was looking at more than one project simultaneously.
Right, I see. Yeah, so you'd be expected to be managing a number of projects at one time.
Yes.
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 How much of your work prior to the Grenfell Tower project involved smoke control systems or dealing with specialist contractors working on smoke control systems?
The project I was on immediately before a job in Hawley for the same principal contractor, Wright. I had an involvement then.
Yes.
And that would have been my first involvement with anything of the like.
I see.
Yeah.
So there was a smoke control system involved in that project?
Yes, there was.
And was that a residential project?
Yes, it was.
And was it residential high-rise?
How that's categorised, I'm not entirely sure.
I mean,
at the time,
roughly how tall?
8 stories.
8 stories. Yes.
7 or 8 stories. I don't believe it was categorised as high rise.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, at paragraph 9 of your first statement, we can still see it there on the page. You tell us that prior to joining JS Wright, you were employed by Dennis Cox Limited as a mechanical supervisor and commissioning manager job role.
Yes.
And then prior to that, you were engaged by JDH Mechanical Services as a mechanical foreman. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how similar was the work you did for those companies to the work you did at JS Wright?
There was differences. When I was working, well, if you go back a little bit further from this, you know, I'd come from being like a plumber's mate
Yes.
to working as a plumber, up to a foreman looking after just plumbing and heating works.
Yes.
And then as I gained more experience, there's certain roles where I was assisting with other trades, things like thermal insulation firms that were lagging pipe work, so on and so forth. Building management system companies,
Yes.
helping out with that, ventilation, standard ductwork,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. So gaining experience there. Moving onto Dennis Cox, that was sort of a freelance position. I wasn't directly employed by Dennis Cox. A little bit more responsibility when it moved into the commissioning phase of it, just
Yes.
organising. And
Yes.
moving into JS Wright, it was just a progression from that.
Yes, I
a bit
understand.
more involvement with other bits rather than my area of expertise.
Yes. And did any of your work for those two earlier firms involve working on smoke control systems?
No, not at all.
No. So it was only when you got to JS Wright that you first encountered those?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you think that other than the Ryden project you talked about, the one previously, the Hawley project, did you say Hawley?
In Hawley, out towards...
in Hawley, sorry.
Out towards Gatwick Airport.
Yes. Other than that project, do you think you've been involved in any other smoke control projects with JS Wright?
No.
No. Yeah. And you're now self-employed, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So you don't... When did you stop working for JS Wright?
I believe September 2020.
Right. Thank
Yes.
you. Yes. Now, at paragraph 10, you then explained that you had attended a number of training courses whilst at JS Wright.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it fair to say that those courses were predominantly about project management or site management or related health and safety courses?
That's correct. There's some courses there to aid my site experience and help me, if you look at the effective communication, human relations, it's just man management.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And did you have any other formal qualifications relevant to the work you were doing at JS Wright?
I did not.
No. Now, paragraph 12 of your first statement, over on page 2, you tell us that this is your role on the Grenfell Tower project, that in brief, your role was to facilitate the delivery of mechanical and electrical elements with the JS Wright contract, and you were responsible for the overall administration, control, programming and progress of the contract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And just to be clear, that was the subcontract which JS Wright had with Ryden, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And JS Wright was employed by Ryden to be the mechanical and electrical subcontractor for the work at Grenfell Tower, yes?
That's correct.
And was your role at Grenfell Tower typical of the kind of role you had as contracts engineer on other projects?
Yes.
Yes. Now, your colleague at JS Wright, David Peacock, says in his witness statement that he took over from you in late 2014 as project manager. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, in common parlance, could your role be described as the JS Wright project manager for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment?
It's hard to differentiate between the role of contracts engineer to project manager.
Right. Did JS Wright
there
have
is-
did they have a separate project manager?
At the time, no. But we did have associate directors who kind of oversee the oversee the works, who I would report to.
Yes.
Yeah, along with design teams for assistance and reference to certain things.
Yes, thank you, that's helpful. And at paragraph 13 of your statement, you say that Richard Moss and J.S. Wright, specialist subcontractor managers, reported to you. Is that correct?
That's correct. I wouldn't say, I suppose you could take that in different ways. I was the person people would go to for assistance where they wouldn't had a full-time present on site. People would be asking me, informing me what they needed done to enable their next visit to carry out works.
Yes.
To sort of role that I filled.
Yes. Now, if we look at paragraph 20 of your first statement now on page 3, here you tell us that it is and was at the time of this project usual for J.S. Wright to engage the services of other specialist subcontractors, referred to as specialist subcontractors in your statement, yes?
Yes.
And is it right that for M&E matters, J.S. Wright was in effect the middleman between Ryden and the various more specialist M&E subcontractors?
I would say that describes it well.
Yeah. And in terms of the smoke control system at Grenfell Tower, sometimes called the AOV, automatic opening vent system, the specialist subcontractor was PSB for the design element, is that correct?
That's correct.
And they also commissioned the system, didn't they?
Yes.
But another company installed it, didn't they?
There was the different elements of the system as a whole were installed by different specialist subcontractors.
Yes, I see. Now, looking at paragraph 14 of your statement on page 2, you tell us that PSB was one of the specialist subcontractors that you had regular contact with during your work on the refurbishment project. Is that correct?
Yes.
To what extent did PSB consult you or update you in relation to their work, in particular in relation to design decisions that were being made over the smoke control system?
In relation to design matters, I would say consulting me, not at all. Towards the tail end, the only sort of input I might have had in a decision to change the way the natural ventilation element of environmental element of the system was controlled, then I would have played some part there.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And you were also in regular contact with Simon O'Connor and David Hughes at Ryden, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did J.S. Wright themselves have any in-house expertise on smoke control systems?
No.
And did you have anybody at Ryden that you could go to talk about specialist matters to do with smoke control? Did you have anybody other than the specialist subcontractor who you could turn to for advice over matters to do with the smoke control system?
My involvement with PSB or their package of works would have been there to facilitate what they needed to do.
Yes.
So to go to someone to discuss technicalities of the way the system worked, so on and so forth, wouldn't have been really a matter for me to discuss.
Yes.
Whereas, the physical constraints and the build progress to now allow components of the system to be installed was where I would be getting involved.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Now, in terms of your own knowledge of relevant standards and guidance relevant to smoke control systems, were you aware of the approved documents that gave practical guidance on the building regulations?
Definitely was aware at the time of building regulations.
Yes.
And the documents that are provided to assist people in understanding them.
Yes, and at the time of the project, had you read relevant parts of, say, approved document B on fire safety?
I wouldn't have done, no.
No. And would you know what the different functional requirements were of the building regulations that overall might be relevant to the work that J.S. Wright was carrying out?
Sorry, do you mind repeating that question?
Yes. Would you know what the different functional requirements were of the building regulations that overall might be relevant to the work that J.S. Wright was carrying out?
It's difficult to say.
Let me give you an example. So for fire safety matters, for example, there is functional requirement B1, which is about facilitating means of escape for those within the building and adequate facilities for means of escape. Would something like that have meant anything to you at the time?
It would have meant something to me, but in a broad spectrum, I would have known that there was various things in the building.
Yes.
Would be parts of the building fabric or mechanical systems.
Yes.
That were there to design egress.
Yes.
In a fire, and obviously firefighters coming into the building.
Yes. What about ever reading any more specific pieces of guidance, like British standards? So, for example, we'll come on to it. In PSB's design documentation, it refers to a particular British standard that one of their performance criteria was taken from. Would you ever, if that cropped up during a project, would you ever go and look at that British standard yourself?
There's that... At that specific time, there are only two bits of information that I definitely had a look at, and one was relating to dry risers, pressure testing of existing dry risers.
Yes.
And at the time of demonstration to building control, I had a good look through the Smoke Controls Association's guide.
Yes.
But other than that, I can't recall specifically looking at any area of building regulations or advisory documents.
Yes,
in relation
or other
to
British standards.
No,
fine, thank you. Yes, and my next question was about that Smoke Control Association guidance. So I think you said that at the time that the system was being commissioned and demonstrated, is that right?
That's correct.
You said you had a good look at that guidance.
Yes.
You probably can't remember, but would that have been the 2015 version 2 of that guidance? Do you remember?
It was the 2015 version.
Yes, great.
In particular, section 9.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. And that's the section about what different types of tests you should carry out on different types of systems when testing and commissioning, yes?
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, if we go to PSB 50214, I think this is the same point. Yes, this is the final version of PSB's technical submission. We can see it's version 6. It's dated the 15th of March 2016. And if we go over to page 3, just to make good the point I was mentioning, under Smoke Control System 1.1.2 at the bottom, that's where we see there's a code of practice for the specification for pressure differential systems, BSEN 12101 Part 6. So you didn't come to look at any part of that guidance during the Grenfell project?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah. Now, in terms of a timeline of your involvement, is it right that from October 2014 to March 2015, you tell us you were on site at Grenfell Tower for about 3 days a week?
That's correct.
Is that correct? And then you left the project in March 2015 and you returned to it in December 2015, from which point you spent about half your working week on site at Grenfell Tower. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if we look at paragraphs 15 and 16 of your first statement on page 2, here you explain that J.S. Wright's involvement in the project really began in July 2014. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. I wasn't involved until later on in that year.
Yeah.
But as far as tendering processes and discussions with riders were concerned, I believe that's around about the correct date.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when did your work, you said you weren't really involved until later in 2014, when did your work really begin in earnest in relation to the M&E works?
So that would have been directly after our internal meeting, which I believe the exact date is right in front of me, 14th of August 2014.
Yes. So after the pre-contract meeting?
Yes.
Yes, fine. And was it your understanding that prior to J.S. Wright's formal involvement, J.S. Wright had been in discussions with Ryden about what the project involved and the extent to which Ryden had already appointed their own specialist subcontractors? Were you made aware of that?
As far as their own specialist subcontractors, I don't think I'd be able to answer that one and say I would have been aware of Ryden's specialist subcontractors until we started to get involved on site and meet these people,
Yes.
sit in meetings and have discussions. But at that point, I
Yes.
say I personally wouldn't have been aware of who they were.
Yes, I see. If we just look at a document on this, JSW 404140, this is a list dated January 2014, so I appreciate prior to your involvement of, it's a list of queries raised by potential contractors about the work required at Grenfell Tower, and on page 4, at number 1, there's the question, have you been in contact with any specialist companies regarding the smoke extraction system? And it says, yes, we've been in contact with Action Air regarding the specification of the dampeners, which is reflected within the mechanical schedule. However, the contractors must make their own arrangements regarding the specialist advice available. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you ever have any contact with Action Air?
Not to my recollection, no.
Yeah. And you tell us at paragraph 44 of your first statement, I don't think we need to turn it up, that PSB was already engaged on the project before J.S. Wright's involvement, unlike many other specialist subcontractors. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's right, isn't it, that J.S. Wright then formalised PSB's engagement as a J.S. Wright subcontractor, yes?
That's correct.
Now, if we go to PSB 50111, this is a J.S. Wright document. It's dated, we can see in the top right-hand corner, the 19th of May 2015, and it is headed Subcontractor Particular Conditions. And if you look under, I think it was meant to say description of works. There's a large, I think this document's slightly corrupted, there's a large I, and then it should read description of works.
Yeah.
It's an underlined heading, kind of just beyond halfway down that page. Description of works to be carried out, including any drawing numbers and specification references. And then it's got full design and drawings for the AOV system. Do you see that there?
I do.
And is it? And we can see that PSB, sorry, I should have mentioned at the top, is the subcontractor.
Yes.
We can see PSB there. And is it right that this constitutes the written agreement between J.S. Wright and PSB?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you considered PSB to be the designer of the refurbished smoke control system, did you?
I did, yes.
Yes. What, if any, due diligence did J.S. Wright, or to your knowledge, Ryden, do about employing PSB as the specialist subcontractor for the smoke control works?
It's quite a difficult question to answer, but to my understanding, there was a specialist company there that had some involvement.
Yes.
And had given advice to the team pre-construction, and as they had a background of what was going on site and were familiar with it, I think the decision was made within J.S. Wright that they were the best people to take the project forward.
Yes. But do you know whether J.S. Wright had a look at PSB, asked any questions of them about their experience, their expertise, before making that decision?
To my knowledge, PSB had worked with JS Wright a number of years earlier, so
Right.
I think there was some, whether they were same personnel or so on and so forth, but there may have been, in the role I was in at the time, there may have been some things that go on in the background that I was not aware of. Checks into especially subcontractors.
I see.
I know if a new subcontractor later on in JS Wright, if a new subcontractor was being brought onto our books as such, there would be our aftercare department, various other checks,
Yes.
physically going and look at their work,
Yeah.
so on and so forth,
Yeah.
would occur.
Yeah.
Maybe that had happened previously.
But you're not
number of years
aware
before.
that you're not aware of any such process in this instance.
In this instance, I was not aware of it, no.
Yeah. And you said that where they were taking on someone that was new to their books, there'd be some kind of checking process before they were engaged. But was it typical for JS Wright that where you'd got a subcontractor like this who'd had some involvement already, was it typical that you would just inherit that subcontractor and then work going forward with them without any further checks?
I don't think I'm the best person to confirm that or refute it, to be honest. At the time, I hadn't heard of, at this time when this project started, I've been with JS Wright for about a year.
Yes.
All the subcontractors that I'd used on the previous jobs were ones that JS Wright had used previously. So I wasn't subject to seeing what the checking process was for a new subcontractor.
Right.
Yeah.
I see.
So
Yeah.
it'd be difficult for me to
Yeah.
give you information on that accurately.
Yeah. But just to be absolutely clear, you didn't have any previous experience of working with PSB?
I did not, no.
And were you ever aware at any stage in the project of any concerns being expressed about PSB and its work?
No.
No. And were you ever aware of there being any discussion within PSB itself, for example, between a man called Fergus McGregor and Mr. Marnie, Hugh Marnie? Were you ever aware of any discussions within PSB about what the right design solution was for Grenfell Tower, and whether there was any perhaps differences within PSB about what the right design solution was?
I don't recall being aware of that
Yeah,
specific scenario
No.
during the course of the build.
fine. And in paragraph 68 of your first statement on page 11, if we just pull that up, you say in the second sentence, end of the first line, I understand that PSB had been involved in the very early stages of the refurbishment project and had been working with Max Fordham in relation to the design. Now, can you help us? What was your understanding when you began working with PSB and working on the smoke control system? What was your understanding of what the design of the smoke control system was at that stage, in basic terms?
From very early on, sort of first time going to site, I do remember sitting in a design team meeting where the smoke control was discussed. My understanding was it was a system there. Whether it worked or didn't work or elements of it worked, I don't think was ever confirmed, but my understanding was there was a team of experienced specialists from PSB, building controls involved, and consultants from Max Fordham that were looking at seeing what they could do to improve what was already there.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Were you aware, when you started working on the project, or made aware subsequently, that the original Max Fordham proposal had been a different proposal from the one that PSB then began developing?
It's quite difficult to take myself back to times. Obviously, I've been looking and following proceedings, and there's been a lot of information of late, obviously, about smoke control. It's hard for me to recollect at the time what my understanding was.
Yes.
I know I've got a good understanding of various parties' faults at the time from what's been said over the past few weeks.
Yes, I understand.
But I couldn't tell you.
Thank you.
Couldn't
No,
answer.
we don't want you to speculate, and I appreciate it's difficult to disengage those things. Now, in terms of the existing system, you say that on your initial visits to Grenfell Tower, the existing system was not operational. That you say that at paragraph 66 of your first statement on page 11. Can you help us exactly when was that you were going to the tower for your initial visits and you were aware that the existing system was not working?
Now, my first visits to site, walking around the building, it was quite obvious there were certain things that were looking a bit shabby. In specific reference to the smoke control system, I'd noticed that while demolition was underway in certain areas, there was a fan on the floor, disconnected. That would lead me to believe that the system wasn't working as intended.
Can you remember whether that was at the bottom of the tower or at the top, at the very top?
At the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you know, or were you ever told, in very basic terms, how the original system had been designed to work?
I've been thinking about this one, but what I know now and what I knew then was two different things, but I do clearly remember seeing a switch that referred to boost function.
Right.
Something along them lines.
Yeah. So if you'd been asked at the time, do you know that this is a natural ventilation system, but it's got an override boost that the fire brigade could use?
I do think that was my understanding at the time.
Yeah, thank you. Do you consider that J.S. Wright was in a position to provide meaningful supervision and scrutiny of PSB's design and commissioning work on the smoke control system?
No, I don't.
And can you expand on why you say that?
To scrutinise a specialist subcontractor, I think we'd have to have the in-house capability to be that specialist subcontractor.
Yes.
And what we've done is engage a specialist subcontractor to do the works. We would be reliant, as J.S. Wright, on approval processes, being the middleman, information from PSB to J.S. Wright onto the likes of Max Fordham Building Control, looking at what the proposals were, what the system designs were, and getting the feedback, information flow to say, yes, that's what we need to install.
Yes.
That's what PSB would need to supply and install by other specialists, I should say. But in-house capabilities for scrutiny, quality control to the level of detail, we wouldn't have the capabilities of doing that.
Yeah. And at the time, were you satisfied that those approval processes you talked about, and you mentioned Max Fordham and building control, were you satisfied that those were going to be sufficient to pick up any problems with the design, any defects in the design?
At the time, most definitely.
That's how you
At the
saw
time,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, so you were confident that if there were any problems with the design or any problems with the commissioning process, that would be picked up by those other people?
Absolutely,
yes?
yeah.
And I think you tell us at paragraph 70, we can see it there on the screen on page 11 of your statement, J.S. Wright engaged PSB as they were the experts in smoke control systems, and J.S. Wright relied on their experience and expertise. J.S. Wright acted as a conduit for information passing between Ryden as main contractor and PSB as specialist subcontractor. So does it follow from all of that J.S. Wright didn't ever themselves consider whether the designs from PSB for the control system, for the smoke control system, were appropriate?
From my role on site, when an approved technical submittal, especially subcontractor, is on site, I'll be there to facilitate that package works, get an understanding of what works they need to do in what order, and especially for ones that are not on site full time, be their go-to, be their reference on site to inform them when they need to be in to do certain things. As far as looking at that information that's given to me to deliver the job, that process happens before it comes to me, if you can see where I'm coming from. Now, JS Wright's design team, we've got some very experienced guys, none of them at the time specialists in this field, but there are guys there that would have an understanding of building regs. I'm sure there would have been some discussions if anything was seen to be obviously
Yes.
not correct, shall I say.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. And when you came on the project and became engaged with it, what exactly did you understand the role of Max Fordham to be at that point?
Consultants to the M&E on the mechanical and electrical on the project. Someone who'd designed a performance specification.
Yes.
And quite detailed, and someone who would be checking our drawings, our technical submittals, and giving approval.
So you did understand that they would be checking the submissions and giving their approval.
Yes.
On behalf of a client?
Yes, that was my understanding.
And who was that client?
To my understanding, their client was the Kensington Chelsea.
Yes.
Kensington Chelsea.
Yes,
yeah,
I see.
Tenant Management
Yeah.
Association.
Did you ever become aware that the performance, you call it the performance specification, but I think technically it was probably the employer's requirements that were drafted by Max Fordham. Did you ever become aware that those employer's requirements set out a different system from the system that PSB then developed as their design?
It's where in the timeline I've become aware of that.
Yes.
Probably not from day one, but over the course of the project, that would have been the case.
Yes.
After I'd been through from the first engagement there, I would have gone through all the Max Fordham documentation, and in that would have been, I think there was a sort of a proposed system schematic within that, which I would have been aware of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you remember realising that that system schematic and the documentation that had been prepared by Max Fordham was based on a different design of system, something called a push-pull system, where air was being sucked into the lobby and then extracted out?
I do understand that there was a set of principles that were being applied to the initial ideas, and that did change with PSB's involvement.
Yes. And what, in basic terms, what did you understand that changed to?
My understanding was that because of the physical constraints of the existing building fabric, PSB had an idea of maximising air movement by using both of the existing shafts to move air out of the building.
Yes.
That's the fundamental of how I understand the system to work.
Yes.
And the fundamental change between the two.
Yes. And did you understand that the consequence of that dual extraction would be to depressurise the lobby when compared, say, with the stair? Did you understand that at the time?
I would have understood that if you've got a fan positioned in a shaft with an opening into an area, that would move air out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but difference in pressure in the duct to the lobby caused by the fan, and the outcome of that would have been movement of air.
Yeah. And what did you understand the overall objective of that to be?
To mine, I think we mentioned it earlier, is to aid escape of persons and to aid firefighters to get into the building.
Right, yeah. Now, at paragraph 52 of your first statement on page 7, I'll just go to that. We've touched on building control already, but you tell us, I had personal dealings with the council's building control people, mainly Paul Hanson and John Hoban, in relation to the automatic smoke ventilation system. From my involvement with them, I formed the clear view that Paul Hanson was very knowledgeable about smoke ventilation systems. And can you just expand on that? What led you to form that view about Paul Hanson?
It would have been sitting in a DTM, which, you know, from my experience of building control people, DSs, whatever reference we call this type of person, they would be someone that would, on site anyway, be coming down to check things. I remember sitting in design team meetings, this is present from the contract side of the JS Wright, thinking this guy's getting involved, you know, and talking very knowledgeably about the subject.
Yes.
With a good understanding of the existing building. And that's at the time. And towards the end of the project, when I was looking at the Smoke Control Association's guide, I discovered pretty much why that was, because the document I was reading, his name appeared on it.
Yes, yes, thank you.
To be honest, at the time, that filled me with some confidence.
Yes, and I'm going to come back to some specific, to ask you about, in particular, a specific meeting that building control were in attendance in due course. In general terms, how often were you in contact with Paul Hanson during the lifetime of the project?
It's quite unusual in my position then and since to be in direct control with building control.
Yes.
Direct contact with building control. I think there was very few times when I had direct contact with him, and I think that would have been around the tail end of the project when we was looking at demonstrations.
Yes. And in paragraph 54 of your statement, just below where we were reading from before, you said building control remained actively involved in the project. Usually contact with building control is via the client, but on this project I did liaise with them directly in May 2016 when arranging for their attendance at a demonstration of the smoke control system. Yes?
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. Now, if we could go to JSW 403472. And at the top is an email sent to you on the 28th of October 2014. And it's from David Bradbury, who's the senior design engineer at JS Wright. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And in the first line of the email, he says, Al, as discussed, I'm meeting Hugh from PSB on Monday to review their solution for the AOV system at Grenfell. I'll let you know what's said and I'll try and get them down to meet yourself, perhaps coincide it with a DTM. Now, you mentioned DTM. Is that design team meeting?
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. And is it right that by this time, i.e. October 2014, JS Wright had taken over responsibility for the design of the new smoke control system?
In my opinion, that's not correct. We've been awarded a package of works which included the smoke control system, but the responsibility was offset by engaging a specialist in the field, namely PSB.
Right, I see. So you didn't yourself consider that you were responsible for making sure that design was delivered properly?
Just want to answer the question correctly. So, responsibility for the design, in my opinion, sat with PSB. JS Wright would be there to facilitate that through flow of information and assisting where they could within their area of expertise.
Yes.
But anything other than that, I wouldn't know.
Yes. Mr. Cross-Smith, in his witness statement for the transcript, this is at paragraph 48 of his main statement for the inquiry, he described it like this. He said, the design of the smoke ventilation system was now in the hands of J.S. Wright, who were taking the lead with building control. Now, would you agree with that summary?
No, I wouldn't.
And is it basically for the reason you just explained, you don't agree with?
Yeah, just my understanding, and it always has been, and it still remains that on these particular contracts, that our intent of what we want to do is always signed off in advance of us starting works on it, before procurement begins, so on and so forth, and definitely before installation begins. And there's a process there, and it goes to a consultant, assuming that approval from building control, where necessary, would be managed and sought by the consultant.
And when you say that approval from building control, where necessary, would be managed and sought by the consultant, do you mean managed and sought by Max Fordham?
In this instance,
As
yes,
the
that would be
consultant,
my understanding
yes.
of how
Thank you.
chain of command and things worked.
Now, if we go to MAX 404511, this is an email from David Bradbury, J.S. Wright, to John Hoban at RBKC Building Control, with you and some others copied in, including others from Ryden. And in the second paragraph, David Bradbury says, hi John, I need to talk to you about the proposed smoke vent system at Grenfell Tower. If we can meet on site next Wednesday, that would be ideal. Alternative, if that's not convenient, please let me know and we can hopefully arrange an alternative time, or I could come to your offices. And this is an email that Mr. Cross-Smith cites in support of his assertion that it was now J.S. Wright who were taking the lead with building control in practice. Do you agree that that's what we're seeing in this email here?
I think all we can see there is David Bradbury of J.S. Wright asking for a discussion with building control. Normal procedure for building control engagement would be via our client or a consultant. The likelihood of what's occurred here is we've been asked by our client to speak directly with building control, or been given the okay to do that, rather than it being our responsibility to do so. That would have been my understanding at the time.
I see, yes. Okay, thank you. Now, if we could look at a document, this is JSW 403474. These are the first set of proposals from PSB in relation to something they're calling there, you can see in the title, Smoke Ventilation Technical Proposal, Stair Depressurisation Systems. And it was issued for comment by Hugh Marney on the 22nd of April 2014. So it's an earlier document from 2014. And if we go to page 2, so you can see a bit more of the document, it says that in the introduction, first paragraph, having identified possible problems with the proposed push-pull system leading to excessive pressure drop due to the high induct velocity within the existing builder's work shafts, an alternative smoke control design solution is required. After discussions, this report provides an alternative approach to designing a lobby control system. These proposals have to be firmed up and submitted to building control or authority for discussion. And then in the fourth paragraph, the proposal is to design a depressurisation system which will protect the stairwell by providing an airflow from the stairwell into the lobby when the stairwell lobby door is open. Now, do you ever remember reading this proposal or being sent this proposal when you were working with PSB on the smoke control system?
I would have read this, yeah. We would, this information we would have had on file on JS Wright server.
Yes.
So I would have had a look. Just obviously want to be completely factual. We had a number of versions of this on our system.
Right.
I believe it was a complete list of various revisions.
Yes.
So I think this part of text may have been copy and pasted on various documents
So
as it went along. I'm not sure if it...
Yeah, so this was a standalone document that set out
Right,
the
okay.
principle of the system, and then what happened was there was a technical submission that was developed from revision 0 through to revision 6,
Right, okay.
which kept changing piecemeal.
Okay.
So do you think that what you saw was perhaps the technical submission?
I'm looking at this. I can see the PSB logo. It's a layout text type,
Yeah.
which is familiar.
Yes.
I'm drawn straight towards this and thought it was, looking at this, one of the revisions of the technical submittal.
Yes.
So if that is not that, there's a possibility I've read it, but I may not have.
Yes, I understand.
Sorry. Apologies for confusion.
No, that's fine. And did you ever think about the extent to which this system was attempting to comply with that British standard that's cited there in the 5th paragraph? Was that something that ever was given any consideration by you or anyone else at JS Wright as far as you were concerned?
Speaking from my involvement and what I was there to do, my opinion and thoughts, and they would have been at the time, that all of this design approval process, having said that, would have been done front end before we start actually installing on site. I know there was some development after the install started,
Yes.
but consideration to specific British standards, my consideration was more to facilitating, and towards the end of it, checking and witnessing, say checking, maybe looking that the system actually done what I was told via documentation it should be doing.
Yes, I understand. Do you ever recall there being any discussion with anyone about what the potential disadvantages of this system, this depressurisation system, as it's described here, might be at Grenfell Tower? Do you ever remember there being any discussion about disadvantages of this proposal?
No, is the answer to that.
Now, in his oral evidence to the inquiry, Mr. Marnie said that he had told Max Fordham that it was absolutely impossible to install a compliant system at Grenfell, i.e. compliant with current standards or particular guidance, because of a number of constraints in the tower, including the size of the shafts, the layout of the corridors, etc. Did you ever have a similar discussion with Mr. Marnie about it being impossible to install a compliant system and therefore just having to do the best with what was left in the tower?
I definitely had an understanding on my second engagement that everything that was possible to increase air movement had been done, and definitely confident in the people that was doing it and the guys that were actually installing the kit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Marnie explained that his proposals were an alternative design solution that met the spirit of the requirements because he couldn't meet the requirements. Again, Do you ever remember something similar being said to you at the time?
At the time, no.
No. And he also referred to the fact that he understood that they were going forward on what he called a betterment, i.e. bettering the airflow of the old system. And he kept referring to it as a betterment. Do you remember that term ever being used during the project?
Not sure the specific term betterment at the time, but I was definitely very conscious that all that could be done was being done, in my opinion, to maximise air movement, as I said earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you conscious during the project that one of the things that building control wanted was some form of analysis that showed how the system was an improvement on the existing system? Did you become aware of that?
It's very difficult to take myself back in time, and I think I may be confusing different projects. I would have been aware of certain models that could have been done from previous projects. From what I can recall at the time, this might be me getting myself a little bit mixed up, particular models to prove certain things on the project might not have been effective, or because it was an existing fabric, existing building, existing fabric, there would be a lot of unknowns.
Right. Yeah.
So, there's over the past few days I've heard mention of CFD models and so on and so
Yes,
forth.
that was my next question. Do you ever remember there being any discussion at any time with any party about whether it might be sensible to do some kind of computational fluid dynamics analysis of the system?
From my recollection, there was discussion. We are going back a long way, but what sits in my memory is that it would be very difficult to do that because it was an existing building with certain unknowns.
Right. And can you remember who it was that was saying it will be very difficult to do that?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Right. Okay, fine. Now, let's just show you the first version of the technical submission. This is PSB 50207. I showed you earlier the final version of it, but this is the first version. It was revision 0. It was issued for approval by Mr. Marnie on the 12th of November 2014. So by this time, were you involved in the smoke control aspects of the project?
I would have been on site by that time.
Yes.
Yeah, involved in the smoke control aspects at that time. I don't think we was in a position to get the ball rolling at that time.
Right. Is it correct that this was issued for JS Wright, who were by now receiving PSB's technical proposals?
I would say that's the case. We'd been appointed by Rydens, and fulfilling that role as
Yes.
middleman, conduit for information from a specialist back to our client for review, approval, yes.
Yes. And if we go on to page 3 of this submission, we can see that it talks about base documents, and at the top you can see under specification, can you see the second bullet point? We've got the Max Fordham employers requirements for MEP services. Do you remember reading those employers requirements?
I know full well that I read Max Fordham's documentation cover to cover.
Yeah.
At the start of the job, straight after I started doing that straight after our first internal meeting on the project.
Yes.
As a way of educating myself to what our scope of works were and getting as much information before we were on site so we could hit the ground running.
Yes.
So, yes, it was a lot of information to absorb
Yes.
in one sitting. It would have took a couple of days. I would have reviewed various documents that were relevant to specific bits of work I was doing.
Yes.
But yeah, I would have seen that
Yeah.
documentation.
Yeah. And there's also reference there to a Max Fordham Grenfell Tower smoke ventilation analysis, revision A, dated the 6th of May 2014. That was an analysis that Max Fordham did comparing the old airflow rate with what was anticipated to be the new airflow rate. In fact, it's said in the document to be the new airflow rate for a push-pull system.
Right.
Do you ever remember looking at that document or considering it?
I would have looked at it.
Yeah.
I would have seen it. Is the answer to that.
And then we can see there's a description of the project below that at 1.1.1, and then it begins. There's a section at the bottom of this page at 1.1.2 on the smoke control proposals. And do you remember that at this stage there was a phase 1 proposal, which is what they could do temporarily to try and get the system back up and running? And then if we go over the page 4, there was then a phase 2, which was the permanent solution as part of the refurbishment. We can see that at the bottom of that page. At a predetermined date, 2 will be implemented to convert the system into a fully mechanical extract system with a new smoke extract run and standby set and fan starter panel with inverter drivers, pressure sensors being fitted. Do you remember there being 2 proposals at this point?
I do remember at the start of the project there being something in place to get some protection into the building as swiftly as possible, and this would be the way of doing it.
Yeah, and can you remember what happened to that in terms of a temporary solution?
I think this may have occurred and changes while I was away from the project. So, to be honest, I couldn't answer that. I haven't seen any information since and to date that tells me exactly why that happened.
Right, okay.
Or didn't happen in this case.
Now, if we could look now at paragraph 53 of your first statement on page 7, you tell us that you met building control for the first time during your first stint at Grenfell Tower, and this was at a design team meeting on the 24th of November 2014, attended by others, including representatives of Wright and J.S. Wright's own design team. The work to the smoke control system was discussed, including the extension of the existing shafts down through the lower part of the tower, where the new apartments would be to be constructed. Now, Mr. Cross-Smith of Max Fordham tells us in his witness statement that this meeting was led by PSB and J.S. Wright, in which the proposed works to the smoke ventilation system were discussed in detail with building control, who in principle accepted the pressurisation system that PSB and J.S. Wright were putting forward. Now, first of all, do you have any memory of that meeting at all? Can you remember it?
I do remember a meeting where I met Hugh from PSB, and I do remember sitting in a space opposite Grenfell Tower, tables laid out, drawings out, spitballing going on, thrashing out ideas. I believe architects would have been there, just talking about how they overcome particular issues with the project. I think the main focus at that time was the new section below the existing residential area. I think I mentioned earlier about it seemed unusual to me about building controls involvement and the level of it. It's my recollection, this sitting down discussion design team meeting, building control were active part of it.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. Do you remember the meeting being led by PSB and JS Wright with building control there? Do you remember that?
I would say that it'd always be led by Rydens as the principal contractor.
Right.
But if specific things were the main topic on the agenda, then that would swiftly be handed over to the persons with the expertise.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're specifically talking about a DTM, when we're talking to smoke control systems, J.S. Wright's design team would be there as part of that DTM, but there would be sitting there with the expert in the field, sitting next to them, discussing it.
And when you're talking about the expert in the field sitting there with them, who are you talking about?
PSP. And,
I see. Yeah. But do you have a recollection of it being at this meeting that PSB were presenting to building control an alternative solution, a new solution, and talking to them about what that new solution involved? Do you remember?
No, what the specific DTM that I can remember was focused around the new areas below the existing residential.
Yeah.
So I think at that time, it's hard to say. It's hard to get.
So you don't have a memory
chronology of it.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Sorry. Yeah, it was difficult to get the chronology of what happened when.
Yes.
There may be some DTM minutes sitting somewhere that might be able to clarify.
So do you not have a memory of a meeting with building control in which an alternative proposal which recommended pressure differentials being used, being proposed to building control for their in principle approval?
I don't remember a meeting where that was proposed. I do remember being in meetings with PSB, with J.S. Wright's designer Dave Bradbury, with Ryan's in attendance, with architects in attendance, where elements of the smoke control system were discussed. But whether it was that meeting where new ideas were put forward, I can't be certain.
Okay. Did you ever have any contact with Exova at any stage, either directly or indirectly, about PSB's proposals?
I don't think so.
No. Did you ever think that it might be a good idea to ensure that PSB's proposals were looked over by a fire engineer as part of the checking process on the project?
Thinking about things now, most definitely. Thinking about my understanding of the process back then and now, actually, I would have expected that to have occurred before any approval was given.
Yes.
Any status to a technical submittal.
So that just wasn't something that was talked about or discussed as a possibility?
Not with me.
Not with you?
Not with me, but I would have expected that to have occurred before install information come to me to assist to deliver.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Did anyone ever mention to you or state that the proposal that was being put forward was similar to something called the Colt shaft, mechanical shaft system?
Not at the time, no.
No. Did anybody ever discuss in your presence the fact that there were extended travel distances at Grenfell Tower on the lobbies between some flat doors and the stair doors? Do you ever remember there being any discussion about extended travel distances?
It's very hard to recollect. Having a look over some documentation recently, just in that was some information on fire strategy drawings. Just having a look at that, I could see on the new floors there was measurements for travel distance there, which I would have seen at the time, but also noted that on existing floors, the measurements were absent.
Right.
So there may have been discussion about travel distances.
Yeah.
I can't recall exactly when.
Yeah. Do you yourself ever recall being aware that the travel distances were in excess of the guidance, for example, in approved document B or in some other British standards?
I wouldn't have done, no. I would have been familiar with that.
Do you recall there ever being any discussion about the risks with this system, of the fact that it might pull air from a fire-affected flat into the lobby? So you've said that you were aware of the fact that it was taking air out of the lobby, and hence the pressure there would be lower. Was there ever any discussion about the extent to which smoke might be pulled from the flat in which the fire was raging?
At the time, no.
No, not at all. Did you yourself ever ask yourself the question whether this new design was an improvement on the existing system?
Yes, I would say I would have done, and I would be quite confident at the time to say it was.
Yes. And how satisfied were you at the time that it could actually work, the system that was being proposed?
At the time of install, wholly reliant on information that's been approved, just going through it. So, but when it actually got to where the system was functional, varying degrees across the job, it was quite surprised at the amount of air movement that was achieved. And my understanding of how things work, how the system was intended to work, I was quite satisfied that it was doing the job, and doing the job to the best way it could do, performing as well as it could do.
Yeah. And when you say doing the job, that was basically delivered by the air movement that...
Yeah, my understanding at the time is what we was trying to do is move air from one place to another to protect stairways, assisting egress in an emergency situation and firefighters coming in the building.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was my confidence in it was compounded by various visits from various people, including LFB, with a number of their guys come down to site, and then walking away satisfied that it would be a good tool in the event of worst case scenarios.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that might be actually a good moment for the morning break.
Yes, all right.
Yes, I'm making good progress,
Good.
and I'm hopeful that we might be able to finish this witness this morning.
Well, let's see how we go.
I think breaking now is a good idea.
All right, thank you. Well, Mr. Whyte, we have a break in the course of the morning, and this is a good time at which to take it. So we'll stop now. We'll resume, please, at 11:30. And I have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right? Thank you. So if you
Thank
go
you.
to the usher, she'll look after you. Thank you. Thank you very much. 11:30.
Thank you.
Would you ask Mr. Whyte to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Whyte, ready to carry on?
I am, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. Just a few follow-up questions from this morning before I go back to my plan. We've seen some emails with David Bradbury of JS Wright on them this morning. Can you just explain who was David Bradbury?
Dave Bradbury was our internal design guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was his role on the Grenfell Tower project?
Him and others would have developed the base design from Max Fordham into something that was workable on site in relation to JS Wright's area of expertise.
Which was?
Plumbing and heating
Right.
services.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a large aspect of the job was a new boiler room as such, new boiler plant, associated equipment,
Yeah.
and a new heating system. shall we
Yes.
say.
And just to be clear, did David Bradbury have any role in terms of the development of the design for the smoke control system on Grenfell Tower?
Not to my knowledge. I would was confidently say no.
Yeah.
He would have been there to assist flow of information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was he senior to you at JS Wright?
We're two different departments.
Right.
But I'd say we were on first engagement. He probably was slightly senior to me. Second engagement, definitely on a par. But we're two different departments. If we look at the internal structure, it was a lot above, for instance, to the point of associate directors.
Yeah.
There was only one person
Yeah.
in between. Like, same as.
Yes, thank you. If we look at an email now, JSW 402945. And I just want to look at the second email down. This was an email much later in the project from Paul Hanson to David Hughes of Ryden, copying in John Hoban, Steve Blake and you at this point, 4th of May 2016. And Paul Hanson, he queries something about the figures in the first part of the email. And then he says in the last part, remember that the testing of the powered vent system we are witnessing tomorrow should be in accordance with section 9, an item of the attached SCA guide. And he attached the 2015 SCA guide and provided that. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've referred to it earlier in your evidence.
Yes.
Did you ever notice that none of the technical submissions that were prepared by PSB referred to that SCA guide?
No, I didn't notice that, and I haven't noticed that since, to be
Right.
honest. It surprises me.
Right.
Yeah.
Was it your understanding at the time that the system had been designed in accordance with the guidance in that SCA guide?
It's my understanding now, the SCA guide is an aid to the Smoke Control Association, bringing together, because I think there's some vagaries in the British standards, as far as I'm aware, maybe incorrect, but it's something which, as it says, is a guide to assist people in the industry. So thinking about it now, I suppose it would be a relevant document to get some specifics in what you need to do to prove systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But that was not something that occurred to you at the time?
No.
No. Can I just look at Mr. Marnie's statement now? This is PSB 401329 on page 11. So at subparagraph 3, just to explain the context, in this part of his statement, Mr. Marnie is explaining some of the key changes in the design that occurred as the technical submission progressed through the project. Because, as we know, there were 6 revisions to that technical submission. Mm-hmm. And here, what he says is, as well as the configuration of the extended smoke shafts, another detail which was finalised after the initial design work recorded in revision 1 of the technical submission was the specification and location of the fan sets used in the system. Initially, it was envisaged that the north and south smoke shafts would be connected at the top of the building and that they would feed into a single smoke extract fan set located at roof level. However, given that an environmental fan needed to be installed at low level and given the space limitations at Grenfell Tower, the design was changed to incorporate one smoke extract fan set in the rooftop plant room, which was used to extract via the north shafts in both environmental and smoke control mode, another smoke extract fan set at walkway level, which was used to extract via the south shafts in smoke control mode, and an environmental supply fan at walkway level, which was used to supply the make-up air via the south shafts in environmental mode. This arrangement is reflected in revision 5 of the technical submission onwards. I also confirmed to JS Wright an email exchange in September. Sorry, that's about the ductwork. So focusing on that change that Mr. Marnie's talking about there. So instead of extracting upwards, both north and south shaft, and to one single set of fans at the top of the building, this change to extracting downwards, down the south shaft and out at the bottom levels of the building. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that change to the design occurring?
I remember looking at the possibility of linking to the shafts at the top of the building. Now, as I keep saying, like being the guy on the site that would facilitate certain things happening. And I remember quite clearly looking at where the shaft that didn't protrude up into the roof space was coming up.
Yes.
And looking at the practicalities of linking the two shafts as PSB proposed.
Yes.
And without some serious changes to things like water tanks, moving kit and cutting large holes in walls, it would have been impossible.
Right.
Yeah. So I think this is where that change come from.
Yes. And were you involved in advising back to the specialist designers that change simply wasn't practical at that
No, I would have been up to have a look.
Yeah.
To see. Who was with me at the time, I don't know, but I can clearly remember looking at the feasibility of linking the two shafts with ductwork in the roof space.
Yes.
And thinking there's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you remember having any discussions with PSB about this second phase of this design, the extract south through the south shaft, downwards through the south shaft? Do you ever remember having any discussions with PSB about that revision to the design? From
a design perspective, I would say quite certainly no. This would be, we've got a proposal. I'm engaged on site. I'm looking at helping. PSB wouldn't necessarily have someone on site. I'd have a look to see if it was practical. Maybe I'd give some advice back.
Yes.
Others would investigate, probably come to the same conclusions as I did, and then that set of challenges would have to be overcome with an adaptation of the design.
Yes.
Again, done by the specialists.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't ever have a discussion with Mr. Marnie about the pros and cons of reverting to this different design, taking it down through the south shaft?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
And just to be absolutely clear, do you ever remember PSB expressing any concerns about that design change at the time?
I don't, but like I say, in my role on the project, I'm there to deliver or assist in delivering approved systems. So as that approval document comes through, I'd then switch into, right, okay, that's approved, that's what we're doing. How do we get it in? How can I help others get it in and deliver the project for our client?
Yes. Yeah, I understand. Now, moving on to the topic of dampers that were used in the system, if we look at paragraph 71, little paragraph 2 of your witness statement, your first statement on page 11, it's right at the bottom of the page. you tell us that you understand that the following AOV smoke control works were completed as part of the M&E parcel of works, and you say new dampers were ordered from Gilbert in accordance with the PSB specification data sheets. Do you see that there?
I do.
Now, to what extent did you consider whether the individual components provided for PSB's design for the system were suitable and appropriate?
To be honest with that, I think, like I said a couple of times, when something has been determined by the design team and approved and sent to site as such as that's what we're installing, I assume that has already been done.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, so consideration relating to the components and whether they're correct, it's not something I'd be aware of, but not something I would be considering checking.
Yes,
and the
I
like.
see. Yes. And just to test that a little,
Yeah.
we can see in the documents that these dampers begin to be suggested in PSB's technical submission. So that they're being submitted to JS Wright, those technical submissions, and it's got those Gilbert's dampers in it. So who did you think, when you say I thought that had already been considered, who are you referring to there that you thought had already considered the suitability of those components?
So I would have expected that once a solution had come up to a particular challenge on site, that and the solution discussed in the background with members of the design team, building control potentially, and a document drafted containing the detail, when that was submitted, that would have been checked by the consultant, in this case Max Fordham, and any other relevant party that was involved in the approval of that before it come back to site to say that's what we're doing.
Yes. Yes. You see, Max Fordham have told us, Mr. Cross-Smith yesterday said he absolutely wasn't doing a checking function. He was retained by the TMO to advise them, and in general terms was keeping tabs with what was going on the project and reporting back to his client. But he wasn't checking, certainly not things like the detail of the components that had been specified. Where did you get your understanding from that that's what Max Fordham were doing?
They were the consultant, and that was my understanding of their role. Come quite a shock when I heard that yesterday.
Right.
When I was listening to proceedings.
And did you ever check with any of your superiors within JS Wright what their role was, and who was it that needed to be checking these components?
I can't say specifically yes, but the whole process of a technical submittal is a document, whether it be something from our specialist or something direct that JS Wright are the experts in, would be forwarded with a supporting page which asks for a status, A, B, C. C fails, B is proceed with comment, A is approved. So this, what I just don't understand why we'd be submitting information to someone for comment approval if that wasn't their role to do it.
I see. Are you actually saying you recall Max Fordham annotating documents with approval like A, B, C, as you've just described?
Yes, not 100% certain it would relate to this, but I would see sheets come back with comment from Max Fordham.
Yes, I see. Okay. So does it follow from your answers that you yourself never considered the fire rating of the dampers and whether the product that had been specified had the appropriate fire rating and fire certification?
I wouldn't have done. I would have taken it that had already been determined and approved before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know at the time that there were different types of damper that could be specified? That there was perhaps something called fire dampers, then fire and smoke dampers, and then smoke control dampers. Did you have any awareness of that?
Not to a technical level enough to understand what was used for what. if you can see what I'm saying.
Yes.
Sorry if I'm not as eloquent as I'd like.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Let's move on now to commissioning and approval, that stage of the process. If we go to PSB 401152, and if we look at page 8 of this clip, these are, so this sheet, and then, so these are the environmental mode readings on this sheet. You can see that from the bottom text on this page. And then if we go over the page to page 9, we see readings that are relevant to the smoke control system. You can see the floor levels, then the open door meters per second reading, the speeds at different grills, low speed, high speed at the different grills. Do you remember ever seeing these readings taken by PSB?
I've seen these readings. As far as seeing these particular set of readings being taken from PSB, the answer to that would be no.
Right.
Yeah.
So you say, I've seen these readings. As far as seeing this particular set of readings being taken from PSB, the answer to that's no. So, sorry, what distinction are you drawing here?
Sorry. Would you mind asking your question again?
Yes. Do you ever remember seeing sheets like this with readings on, which were the readings taken during PSB's testing and commissioning process?
Most definitely. So,
Right, yes.
From your original question, I took that you was asking me whether I was present when these particular readings were taken.
Sorry, I see. I understand. So you weren't present when they were taken, but you do remember seeing them
Yes,
subsequently.
most definitely.
And did you ever inspect this kind of information and check it against the design?
Yeah. So I obviously become more and more familiar with what the system was meant to do after initial demonstrations and talking with PSB site guys, being privy and present at demonstrations, and understood what the system was meant to do and what this meant. So, yes.
Yes, thank you. And were you ever aware that there might be particular British standards that might be relevant to the types of tests you would need to carry out on the smoke control system?
I think I did mention this one earlier. Just the Smoke Control Association's Guide, 2015.
Yes.
I was aware that there was different criteria for demonstrating performance depending on what system it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was the extent of your knowledge, was it? You didn't know whether there were other British standards which might be relevant to the testing and commissioning process?
I'm sure there would, but I was, like I said earlier, but the Smoke Control Association Guide was a summary of what needed to be done for different types of system.
Yes. And if we go back to the readings again, PSB 401152, and look at page 9, you can see that you're getting one open door meter per second reading. When you read this, what did you understand that figure to represent?
The speed or velocity of air moving through that opening.
Yes. And did you understand from reading this that there had been one test done of that? Or did you understand that this was an average of a number of tests?
See, this is where at the time and present just conflict a little bit. Now, when I'd seen readings taken and system was shown to me by PSB, it was only one reading taken at the centre. I do know what the commissioning engineer who commissioned the system, or responsible for commissioning the system, has said, and I'll be quite confident that what he said is what he did, is taking
I see. So
averages
yeah. So what
in
you're
a very
saying
specific way.
The there could well have been a difference between what he did during his commissioning process and what you saw when he then demonstrated the system to
Yes.
you. Yeah.
Yes.
And when you had it demonstrated to you, you would just see one reading being taken on each
Yeah.
door. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And do you remember seeing a reading being taken for each level, every single one? Was that demonstrated to you?
I'd asked the commissioning engineer to show me the system ahead of demonstration. So, sorry, I'm probably going off on a tangent. Could you repeat your question?
Yes. So when it was demonstrated to you, you said you remember seeing one reading being taken for each level, yes?
Yes.
Or one taken on each door. Do you remember how many levels you saw
Yes.
that on, or was it just a sample?
I could quite confidently say it was every level.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, door force, opening door force, did you understand that one of the things that had to be checked as part of the commissioning process was that the force on the door, the stair door, was not too strong, so that it could actually be opened by residents who were escaping?
I did understand that, yes.
Yeah. Let's go to an email, PSB 401152. This is an email from David Harrison, PSB, to Jonathan Earl at JS Wright, I believe. And it's dated the 26th of May 2016. And if we look at the third paragraph down, it reads, the control system will also has pressure sensors added into each ventilated lobby to control the speed of the fans, to ensure that when the doors on the escape routes are closed, that the opening force on the door does not exceed 100 newtons as detailed in, and then this British Standard 12101 Part 6. This was witnessed by your Mr. Alan Whyte, and the reading, which was not recorded in our commissioning sheets but read as 85 newtons on the scale provided by JS Wright. So is it right that you were involved with some testing of those door opening forces with PSB?
As I wouldn't say I was involved in the testing, as part of familiarisation of the system for what I would have to do at a later date.
Do you remember?
I was shown.
Yeah, sorry.
I was shown certain things. This is where my memory does, and exact dates of and the chronology of what occurred when does come in. It is slightly fuzzy. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into right now, but
Well, it might help if we broke this down a little bit. Sorry, Grace, let me try.
No, exactly.
First of all, do you remember either you or anyone else from JS Wright providing a scale or some sort of graduated spring balance?
I remember going out and purchasing something very basic that would enable someone to see a force that was applied to a door.
All right. And do you remember seeing anyone do a test on a door to see what the force was that was required to open it?
Right, so initially, during show and tells from PSB to me about how the system works and operated, and I do believe in first sets of demonstrations, the test as such was it could be easily opened. You know, so you could stand there. I think how it was explained to me is if think about an elderly lady trying to open the door,
Yes.
and that sort of force, but nothing technical or accurate, nothing measured. It wasn't until a later date that I come aware of this pull force,
Yes.
and there's me thinking, right, okay, building control and others want to see, I've got a set of criteria here they're expecting to see.
Yes.
How do we show them?
Yes.
Hence a quick dash down to somewhere where I could buy something that could give a reading.
Yes. And do you remember that you had to buy something that showed the force in newtons?
From the places where I was going to buy something that could give a reading of that salt, it would have been in metric or imperial,
Yes.
rather than pounds, foot-pounds or kilograms,
Yes.
rather than the more technical Newton meters.
And when you came back with that measuring device, because you obtained that device, yes, do you remember actually using that device to test
I do, yeah.
doors?
I do, yeah.
And do you remember testing one door, or do you remember testing multiple doors?
My memory is fuzzy on this, but
Yes.
the thing that sticks in my mind of why I dashed out to go and get that device was to show interested parties what the actual pull force of that door was. So rather than using it for a system check or test, but literally there was a tool so we could, like during the demonstrations that initially PSB would have done, there was something. Because I can remember that they didn't have the kit
Yes.
to show it.
Yeah.
So
And
I don't remember the process outside of a demonstration,
Right.
where that process was
Right.
done.
Yes, because in his evidence, Mr. Partlow of PSB said that you pulled the doors open, took the readings, and you wrote the readings down.
So I can't recall that.
Yeah. And do you remember noticing that the commissioning report that had been produced by PSB didn't have any record of door readings in it at all? Do you remember noticing that?
It's obvious now. At the time, I think it was covered in like a statement that said it was between this and this. But on the actual commissioning report, it wasn't there.
Right, yeah. And Mr. Partlow told the inquiry that he subsequently asked for these readings but was never provided with them. Do you have a recollection of being asked to provide readings of the door pull force?
I don't.
No, thank you. Now, let's go to PSB's commissioning report. This is at PSB 50224. So we can see from the top, it's PSB and it's called Above Ground Commissioning Report. And it's dated the 28th of April 2016. It's got Mr. Partlow's name on as the engineer. And if we turn on within it to page 7, we can see that Mr. Partlow has signed it, but also you have signed it for JS Wright. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, can you explain why you were putting your signature on that report and what responsibility you were taking for that report?
This would have been after the system had been shown to me as operable. I would have seen the testing procedure that PSB's on-site guys would have gone through, and that was me signing off on behalf of JS Wright to say that their package of works were complete,
Yes.
to get to a point where financial, more from a financial perspective. So, right, that's their work's complete. We can release a certain amount of the rest of their contractual monies and part of a retention.
Yes, I understand.
Pretty much that's me saying, right, I've seen that the system's operating.
Yeah.
It's been demonstrated to me.
Yeah.
These are the readings that we was looking for. That's what we're getting. pay them.
Yeah. In your statement, you make clear this, for the transcript, this is at paragraph 122 on page 20. You make clear that you weren't signing this to confirm that you'd independently checked and verified all the results. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think at the time or now I'll be the right person to be doing that.
Yes, I understand. But you were signing it to effectively acknowledge receipt of the report, that you'd witnessed the system being demonstrated.
Yes.
And that you were signing off on that part of PSB's work.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. If we go now to JSW 402945, and if we look at page 2, at the bottom of this page is an email from David Bradbury on the 3rd of May 2016 to Mr. Harrison at PSB, and copying in yourself there. It's subject Grenfell Tower Building Control Demo, and it says, "Morning, David. Alan will be with Building Control tomorrow to do some final demonstrations. One being the airflow measurement across the dampers on the floor levels. The technical submission states an average of 2 meters per second velocity across the lobby stairwell door, but are you splitting the flow rate across the 2 dampers? Question mark. And then over the page, basically, can you confirm what meters cubed per second reading we should be demonstrating to building control at each damper?" So that's the email that's being sent by JS Wright to PSB, asking for a meters cubed per second reading, and making clear that you're going to be at site the next day to, if we go back one page, just so we can look at what that said. You'll be with Building Control tomorrow, so that will be the 4th of May, to do some final demonstrations, one being the airflow measurement across the dampers on all the floor levels. Do you remember being with Building Control at that time and conducting some airflow measurements?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And were those meters per second measurements that you were demonstrating to Building Control?
They were.
Yes, so the velocity across
Yes,
the door.
that's correct.
Yeah. Now, on page 2, in your response, 2 emails above, at 1:36 p.m, we can see you say on the 3rd of May to David Hughes and Steve Blake at Ryden, "Dave, the attached dock Grenfell Tower readings in fire details high and low speed reading for high and low grills, as well as door velocity." Alan Whyte. And you attached the sheet of readings from PSB that we've already seen.
Yes.
To this email. And then if we go up the thread at the bottom of page 1 and over the page, we can see then there's an email from David Hughes to Paul Hanson. And if we look at what's said at the top of page 2, "Please see attached airspeed readings for the smoke extract ventilation system at Grenfell Tower. Please let me know if you need any further information prior to Thursday. Kind regards, Dave." So those speed readings are sent to Building Control. And then if we go back to page 1 in the email above that, we can see on the 4th of May, we've already looked at this email, but this time I want to look at the beginning of it, 4th of May 2016. Mr. Hanson says to David Hughes of Ryden, "Hi David, the figures you've sent do not appear to be extract readings. They should be in meters cubed per second. The readings you've sent are velocity readings in meters per second." Now, were you aware at this time that Building Control were insisting on seeing readings taken in cubic meters per second rather than velocity readings?
I was.
And did you understand why it was that Building Control wanted those readings instead?
I didn't.
Was that ever explained to you?
I don't think it was. I don't recollect it ever being explained to me
Right.
why they wanted that.
Yeah. If we go to another email thread on this topic, JSW 403529. In the second email down on this page, Mr. Harrison at PSB says to Mr. Bradbury at JS Wright, again copying you and Mr. Partlow in, 8th of June 2016, we've received your correspondence and would comment as follows, and various comments are provided. An anemometer measures velocity, not volume flow. As far as I'm aware, there are no products in the marketplace which can measure the volume flow rate, but I might be wrong. Should additional tests be required by the building control, we're unable to accommodate the requests on this occasion. Suggest you contact a specialist organisation to fulfil their requirements. We don't understand why they won't accept the simple calculation we've put forward, as this is a standard format in our industry, not to mention the standard method in the HVCA industry. While there's a requirement for a smoke ventilators at the head of a stairwell, there are no requirements in any standards or code of practice for there to be an automatic opening ventilator at the base of a stairwell. And then our commissioning results show that the system is achieving the design requirement without an AOV at the base of the stair. So the last two comments relate to whether there needed to be an AOV at the base of the stair. And the first two are about basically pushing back. Is that right? Isn't that right? And saying we don't understand why they want volume readings rather than velocity readings.
Yes.
Yes. And then if we go to the top of the thread on this page, we can see David Bradbury says to Jonathan Earl, copying you in, 28th of July 2016, John, I'd ignore that previous email for now, as I've just found the email below where I chased them for a response. As Dave H has said, we'll see if the client accepts the comments put forward. So it would appear that the way it was left was, well, let's see if building control come back again. Is that correct?
Well, this is JS Wright filling their role as conduit of information. You know, building control have asked for something via our client. That's then passed on to PSB for comment. They've provided comment and that's passed back.
Yes. And as far as you're concerned, were any volume readings ever provided to building control?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to ask you some questions about a demonstration that was carried out on the 26th of March 2016.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at paragraph 100 of your first statement, page 17, you explain in this paragraph, you say on the 23rd of March 2016, I was present at a demonstration of the BMS, the Building Management System, during which the interface with the AOV, the automatic opening vents, was demonstrated. Also present were Matt Smith, Max Fordham, Tony Batty, Silcock Dawson, Dave Hughes Ryden, and an engineer from DCS Direct Control Systems responsible for the wiring and interfacing. So you were present at that demonstration. And if we go to JSW 40's 1889 at page 2, this is one of the exhibits to your witness statement, and what it is an agenda for this building management system witnessing. Do you see that?
I do see that. That's more than an agenda. I'd say rather than an agenda, I'd say that's Mac Fordham's findings.
Ah, I see. So
Yeah.
you think this is actually the notes of what
Yeah.
occurred at this witnessing?
Yes.
As it's described here. I understand. Now, can you just help us? Who ultimately was responsible for demonstrating that the building management system was working on this occasion?
The building management system, responsibility for showing it was working. Our specialist subcontractor, DCS, Direct Controls Systems, I think that's how their initials go, would have been there to demonstrate that element of the plant room.
Yes, I
Yeah.
understand. Yes.
The rest of this plant area, I would have been doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you say in your first witness statement, paragraph 104, that it was not the purpose of this demonstration to prove the full functionality of the AOV system. To what extent during this demonstration was the AOV system demonstrated at all?
This particular bit, the only function that was demonstrated was the interface between the building management system and the smoke control system.
Right.
Yeah. To show certain bits were doing what they're supposed to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And effectively, was it mainly testing that the smoke control system's activation caused the boilers in the building to shut off?
What he was there to do was to activate the building management system's safety circuit,
Yeah.
which then has a cause and effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of those
is shutting down the boilers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And is it right that building control was not at that demonstration, that particular one?
That would be correct.
And it doesn't look like PSB were involved either, is that correct?
I wouldn't have expected them to
Right.
be.
Yeah. Now, there was then a demonstration on the 28th of April 2016. If we go to paragraph 111 of your first statement on page 19, you say, I was present on site for the first AOV demonstration, which took place on the 28th of April 2016. On this occasion, there were representatives from the LFB, Granville Partlow, PSB, Dave Hughes, Ryden. I believe that Matt Smith of Max Fordham was present. And you go on to tell us at paragraph 113 that you say on that date the system operated as intended, and I recall that everyone present was content with the demonstration. Now, can you just help us? What was the process that was adopted for this demonstration?
I'm quite more familiar with the next, exactly what happened on the next demonstration, because there's documentation to support it. On this one, it would have been PSB fulfilling part of their obligation to demonstrate the system to those in attendance.
Yes.
So it would have been, from my recollection of what happened on that day, there would have been a familiarisation part from Granville, letting people know what the system done and how it done it in layperson's terms, and then followed up by showing people what happened when the system was working.
Right.
That would have been activating the system, showing that the system's components were working as they should,
Yes.
altering fan speeds under certain conditions, automatic changeovers of duty and standby fans, automatic changeovers of primary and secondary power supplies,
Yes. Yeah.
and the like.
And would you have gone and looked at different levels to check that, say, the level where it activated was open and that other levels were closed?
From a demonstration, it's typical to ask someone to pick the amount and location of floors
Yes.
to do the testing. If you can imagine, if you've got, I know some people have said there was a couple of people from the LFB. From my recollection, there was more than that. I'm sure you can understand that their time is precious, and my understanding is their time is precious and they wouldn't want to go for a full system check, commissioning record.
Yes.
And it would literally be, this is how the system works and this is how it would work in a few locations.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, building control was not present at this demonstration.
No, unfortunately, they couldn't attend. How the process, if you can imagine PSB, they were not London-based.
Yeah.
Their engineers were not London-based. They were down to site for the last part of their contractual works, which should have led on to the final demonstration. I think when we was at a point where they're certain they'd be ready for that, our clients would have been informed of that, and the process of getting the right people at the right time started. And unfortunately, building control couldn't be there at that time.
Right, yes. And can you remember, were there representatives from the TMO there at that time?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I do apologise.
It sounds from what you're saying like you think there were more people there than you've listed here, but you can't remember exactly who those
Exactly
people are.
that. Now, the information that you had earlier from Max Forden about what happened when with minutes and all that sort of stuff, nothing like that was, a document like that wasn't kept
Yes.
with the findings, so that would have been helpful, but I just can't tell you who exactly was there, apart from knowing there was the fire brigade there, the guy demonstrating it, our client's representative, Dave Hughes, and knowing Matt Smith from Max Forden was there.
Yes.
I can remember those
Yeah.
people were there.
Mr. Whyte, I think you're speaking quite fast, and
Sorry.
also sometimes you're jumping in before I've quite finished the question, and I think that means that it's hard to transcribe. So if you could just try and
I do apologise.
slow down a little bit,
Okay.
that's helpful. Now, Matt Cross-Smith, in his statement, refers to the fact that there were some pull test demonstrations taking place on a number of doors on this occasion. Do you remember that?
I think this goes back to what we was mentioning earlier about popping out to get a bit of kit so we could show some form of reading. So this would have been, as we've just mentioned, in various random locations.
Right, I see. Yes, that's helpful. And Mr. Cross-Smith also says in his statement that the override at the ground floor HMI panel was demonstrated to show that firefighters could manually override the system from this point. Do you remember demonstrating that?
I remember being present when PSB demonstrated.
Sorry, I beg
it,
your
yeah.
pardon, yes. Do you ever remember any detailed instructions being provided to the LFB about how that HMI panel worked and what all the different possibilities were for activating that panel?
I don't know if the full technical information was ever shared with LFB, but I do, as far as information, there was something that come through from building control about some simple instructions to be placed at the control panel, which Dave Hughes from Wright's quite nicely put together. I think I do remember seeing some text from a building regulation saying that the instructions should be simple and easy to understand, something
Right.
along them lines. I may be mistaken, but that is what's in my mind.
Right.
Yeah, in answer to your question, I was not aware, through not having direct correspondence with LFB, whether they had full technical information on the system.
Yes. In paragraph 75 of your first statement at page 13, you explain how the system would sound upon activation. And firstly, you say that upon detecting smoke, one would hear the system making a low hum. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you tell us that when the lift lobby door opened, you would hear a loud noise as the fans ramped up. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I appreciate this is a difficult question to answer, but how loud were the fans at that point? Can you compare it to an everyday noise that you might hear and tell us whether it was similar to that?
It would be dependent on where you're standing. If you was, say, on one of the lower floors, close to the fans that were in the lower part of the building, the noise coming from the duckborn noise in that area would be quite loud. I'm trying to think of the recognised terms in the dB scale. You definitely have to raise your voice to speak to someone in your proximity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I see. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Did anyone ever discuss with you, or do you remember anyone else discussing, the possibility of using a cold smoke machine to test the system, for example, by taking a vacant flat and actually doing some tests with a quantity of smoke?
I don't recall it at the time.
Now, moving on then, we know that there was another demonstration on the 5th of May 2016 with building control present. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
And if we look at paragraph 128 of your first statement on page 21, you explain there, you say, I met with RBKC building control representatives, Paul Hanson, on site on 5th of May 2016. Prior to doing so, I sent by email to Paul Hanson a copy of the cause and effect, revision 4, schematic and des ops, technical submission revision 6 for the smoke control system. And you go on and say, I explained that at short notice the specialist from PSB, Grenfell Partlow, was unable to attend, but that I would do what I could to assist in the demonstration. Now, did you consider yourself qualified to be able to demonstrate the performance of the system to building control?
Not qualified, no.
Why not wait for Mr. Partlow or someone else at PSB to be available, given that it was PSB who designed and commissioned the system?
The answer to that is time constraint. I can't remember. Obviously, that would a question that would have been asked. The answer would have come back, we have engineers available at this time. All the time while our clients are trying to achieve practical completion of the project, and building control acceptance would be a part of that process of our client obtaining practical completion. After having the system demonstrated to me and being present at a demonstration, I felt that I could repeat what had been shown.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And what was Mr. Hanson told that PSB couldn't be present at the demonstration?
I believe so.
Did you check with him whether he was nevertheless happy to proceed?
There's some correspondence around this. I can't remember exact wording.
And is it right that the 5th of May 2016 was the only on-site demonstration for building control?
I believe that's the case.
And Mr. Partlow said in his statement that when he'd done the demonstration on the 28th of April 2016, he answered questions from all those present about the system and its operation. Were you in a position to answer questions during the demonstration on the 5th of May 2016?
There may have been some questions I could have comfortably answered. If there was any questions I couldn't have comfortably answered, I would have referred back to our experts, our specialists.
Right, I see. If we look at paragraphs 130 and 131 of your statement, page 21, you tell us at 130, I recall that on this occasion, this is dealing with the same visit, Paul Hanson and I were in a lift lobby when the demonstration took place. When the system kicked into smoke mode, the vents opened as intended. We could feel the movement of air, flat doors slammed, and the letterboxes and the flat doors opened and shut. And then you go on, you say, on this occasion, Paul Hanson tested the door from the lobby to the stairwell and he was able to open it without too much difficulty. Paul Hanson was testing the pull strength required to open the door while the AOV system was activated to prove the compliance of the specific requirements, which had been set to be a maximum of 100 newtons. Now, do you remember, were any measurements actually taken during this demonstration?
So when we're doing this demonstration, it's to show the system's working as intended. So taking measurements and recording them, I don't think that is what the essence of a demonstration's about. That should be covered in the commissioning beforehand.
Yeah.
This this whole visit would have been a repeat of what PSB had done as a demonstration. So we would have had a rundown of the system, but to be quite frank with it, Mr. Hanson would have been more knowledgeable about smoke ventilation, smoke control systems, and this specific smoke control system than I. But he's going through a series of, this is what the system does.
Yes.
Activating the system.
Yes.
Showing that fan speeds ramp up and down.
Right.
Showing that the fans, the duty and standby fans would automatically change over on failure. Primary power supplies, key switches work. The
Yes.
components of the system are working as intended.
Yes, I understand. Mr. Hanson has described this demonstration in his statement, and he describes it as limited to the sequence of operation of the system. Is that a fair description in your view?
Sequence of operation.
It was limited to the sequence of operation of the system, by which I think he means limited to showing him the steps of operation of the system as it went through during your demonstration.
I think with the addition of some localised random performance testing,
Yes.
i.e. door pulls and velocities across the open door.
Right. Yes, thank you. And did Mr. Hanson express any concerns at all during the demonstration?
I can't recall concerns,
Right.
and that was confirmed. I'm not sure if confirms the word, but with the issue of a letter of comfort that I'd seen from Rydens, there was I think 1 or 2 items that he'd asked for some attention to be given to the smoke control system as a whole. Other than that, I was quite sure they was content with it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Now, if we go to paragraph 143 of your first statement on page 23, you explain that you attended Grenfell Tower on the 2nd of November 2016 at the invitation of Claire Williams. And you say it related to an issue with the system, and we agreed to meet on site on that day. Now, is it right that the problem that had been identified was that the smoke control system was activating and turning the boilers off, and the TMO staff were then unable to turn the smoke control system off? Is that what you understand the problem to have been?
No.
So can you explain what you understood the issue with the system was that you were being called out to deal with?
I believe Just trying to get exactly when this was, because there was a few things going on after practical completion. Issue with the existing system. So this is in relation to the plant room. You'd probably be aware that the new boiler and heating system was in the same basement as an existing system.
Yes.
And there was an interface between the two of them from a BMS perspective.
Yes.
They share the same safety circuit. What's being referred to here in 145 is a walk we done about inspections and maintenance that needed to be carried out. So I probably haven't. Sorry.
I see.
I'm getting a little bit lost here.
Yes,
I do apologise.
Let's look over the page at what you say at paragraph 146 of your first statement. So you say that during this site visit, this might help you remember the visit. During the site visit with Claire Williams, I mentioned to her that it was important to set up a maintenance log and use people who understood the plant and equipment. This involved regular, sometimes daily, physical checks of the equipment and the display panels to see if anything was out of the ordinary. I formed the impression that the TMO would get these checks done by their on-site caretaker rather than by their external maintenance contractor, NG.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you remember saying to Miss Williams that it was important to set up a maintenance log?
I do remember discussions with Claire Williams. I do remember walking about the site with Claire Williams, going through bits and bobs, shall we say, elements, components of the system, not a comprehensive walk or inspection, and just giving some advice that they should be engaging as specialists in smoke control systems to be maintaining and looking after the equipment and the
Yes.
system.
And what was the reaction when you explained that?
As I'm saying here, I got the impression that it would be done by their on-site guys. That's me not knowing whether their on-site guys may be competent to do that.
Right.
Don't know, but I got the impression that their existing team would be dealing with it.
Right, I see. And did you ever then tell any of the caretakers, as you've called them there, what checks would need to be done?
That wouldn't be my job to do that, nor would I be qualified and experienced enough to go to the level of detail of providing a test, inspection, maintenance regime for the smoke control system. That would not be my area of expertise.
Yes, I see. Now, Mr. Hughes, David Hughes of Ryden, and this, for the transcript, the reference for this is at paragraph 112 of his statement on page 24 of that RYD 30094213. Mr. Hughes says that on the 2nd of November, on this occasion, that he and you gave a demonstration of the smoke control system to somebody called Paul Stedman, who was the TMO Estate Services caretaker. Do you remember meeting a Mr. Stedman on this occasion and giving him a demonstration?
The name, I don't recall. To be honest, past the demonstration with building control, I don't recall any further demonstrations being carried out.
I see.
So
when you were with Claire Williams on the 2nd of November, do you remember meeting any of the caretakers or people known as the estate services caretakers for the TMO and explaining to them how the system worked?
It was possible.
Right.
I can't recall at the moment. I specifically remember walking around with Claire and Dave. I can't specifically remember meeting with Claire's or the maintenance team down there.
Right. And you don't remember the purpose of the demonstration, at least in part, being to show Mr. Steadman how to test the system regularly?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Do you remember the purpose of the demonstration, at least in part, to have been to show Mr. Steadman how to test the system regularly?
I'm struggling to answer that question. I don't believe I would have got involved with showing someone how to test a system that I wouldn't know how to comprehensively test myself.
I see. Yes, I mean, Mr. Hughes says that the reason for this was that Paul Steadman would be doing a weekly and monthly inspection and test of the system to ensure it was working, and that's why he and you demonstrated the system to him.
Two separate things there. In my mind, there's two separate things there.
Yeah. So what
showing
you're saying
someone.
is, yeah.
Apology.
I think what you're saying is you did demonstrate the system, but you didn't show him what tests he should be doing on a regular basis. Is that correct?
Although I don't recall this further demonstration to another party, it's likely that it occurred. But the purpose of that wouldn't be to showing someone how to test, maintain,
Yes.
or look after the system in any way. It would have been, this is how the system works as a demonstration.
Yes. And just another point that arises. So in Mr. Steadman's evidence, in his statement, this is paragraph 23, page 4 of his statement, he says he can't remember who gave him the training about the system. That's how he describes it. But he says he does remember asking whether it was necessary to check the system on every floor and being told it was not, as any issues would show up on the ground floor. Do you remember saying anything like that to Mr. Steadman during that demonstration?
As I've said, I can't remember the demonstration occurring. That doesn't, any advice like that I wouldn't have been able to have given.
Right.
And I'll quite confidently say I didn't give any advice like that.
It is oral evidence to the inquiry. Paul Steadman said that the man who ran the training was someone he thinks was from JS Wright, and he told him that he didn't need to check the system on every floor and that he could check the system by running it for 30 seconds. Again, does that help? Do you remember saying anything like that to Mr. Steadman during that demonstration?
I can't recall, no.
Well, I think what you said is you don't remember giving a demonstration to a Mr. Steadman at all. Is that right?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. So
Yes, thank you.
when you're asking these questions, I can't remember the event. All I'm saying is I'm quite confident I wouldn't be giving advice on how to test, maintain, or check the system for faults or problems, because I wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
I knew the fundamentals of the system, how it's meant to work, 2 performance objectives, and had an understanding of the cause and effect.
Yes, thank you. If we look now at paragraph 91 of your first witness statement, page 15, you say that the AOV panel, and I think you're describing the AOV panel in the ground floor, contained a series of basic instructions about operating the system manually on a particular floor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you tell us this was required by RBKC's building control manager, Mr. John Hoban, as set out in a letter from him to Dave Hughes of Ryden, dated the 2nd of June 2016. Now, if we can go to an email string now, RYD 3092074, and I want to start on page 2. We can see that David Hughes sends to you on the 30th of June 2016. He says, "Hi Alan, please see attached a very basic guide to using the smoke extract system at Grenfell Tower. This is required by building control. Can you please check and comment on? I'd like to send it to the fire brigade before the weekend. A copy will also go by the main fire panel. Kind regards, Dave." Now, do you remember being asked to check those instructions?
I remember that email coming over with the attachment that come with it.
Yes. Do you remember actually providing any comments on the draft instructions that were being sent to you?
I think my response was something on the lines, it looks good.
Yeah.
In hindsight, what I should have done at that stage is refer it back to the specialists for comment
Yes.
on it, PSB, but I did not do that. I don't know why I didn't do that, but it wasn't something I did do.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
If we go to JSW 401901 at page 2, these are the instructions as exhibited to your witness statement. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Basic guide how to use the system when activated, and then various instructions on the left, and then some identification of the dampers in tables on the right. And if we look at a photograph of these instructions in situ, if we go to BLAS 5031 at page 138, this is from Dr. Lane's Phase 1 report. We can see a copy of these instructions in situ adjacent to the HMI panel mounting. We could see in this photograph that the HMI panel's been removed, and then these instructions went below that. Is that correct?
That's how I recall.
Yeah. Now, if we just go back to the instructions where we can see them a bit more clearly, to that JS Wright document, JSW 401901, would you accept that although these instructions explain that only one floor can be manually controlled at a time by using the yellow smoked extract key switch in the lobby, they don't say that a user must turn off the key on one floor before they can then operate another floor?
No, it doesn't say that, yeah.
And if we go to BLAS 5031 at page 143, this is Dr. Lane's report. We can see a photograph of the individual floor control screen at the top, a figure J78. Now that is the override screen that provides access to an individual floor control screen. Do you see that there?
I do.
And can we agree that the instructions don't say what would happen on this screen if a key switch was used and a user tried to press one of the buttons on the screen?
Yes, I could agree with that.
So it's
Doesn't
not
say that.
explaining
No.
the interface and what takes precedence as between manually overriding by touching this screen and as between using the yellow key switch in the lobbies, yes?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if we look also within Dr. Lane's report, BLARP 2 5035 at page 287. In this part of her report, Dr. Lane's analysed the operation of the HMI panel and compared it with the instructions that were provided. And she notes at paragraph 7, 10, 14, so she says she notes that if a user inserted the key at the HMI panel and turned the system from auto to on, these three options appear, as shown in that figure. And one difficulty she identifies is that the instructions don't indicate what each of these three options actually do. And if we go to paragraph 7, 10, 17 on page 288, she says at the top of that page, if we could just zoom in to that very top paragraph, the instructions state that only one floor can be manually controlled at any one time. However, they do not make clear the more complex requirements, which were that a user had to turn off the yellow key switch at the floor of operation before another yellow key switch could be operated to change the floor of operation. I think that's actually the same point I was putting to you before, but you can now see it with reference to this. And that the instructions don't explain that the yellow floor override switches do take preference over any manual control from the HMI panel. I think you've admitted that, or you've accepted that the instructions didn't deal with those complexities. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
Was a more comprehensive set of instructions ever sent to building control or the fire brigade?
Within the technical documents from PSB, I believe there's the description of operations that are in there, what happens when. They were a document that was distributed between relevant parties on the project. So I would say those who needed to see it saw it during the construction phase.
Yeah. But to your knowledge, a more specific set of instructions, a more detailed set of instructions wasn't ever sent to the fire brigade?
I wouldn't, no.
You wouldn't?
To my knowledge, we've got this basic set of instructions here that Dave Hughes kindly put together. A detailed set of instructions of how the system worked was in the technical documentation. Whether that information was shared with London Fire Brigade and whose responsibility it would be to do that, I do not know.
Right, yes. And Dr. Lane also explains in this part of her report at 7, 10, 19 on this page, in the middle of the page, she explains that if a user had turned the system off at the HMI panel and then selected restart the system, this would restart the system's fans and the dampers on the original fire floor where smoke had been detected first, regardless of whether a manual key switch had been activated elsewhere. Now, was that your understanding of how the system worked?
No, it wasn't.
What was your understanding then?
My understanding of how the system works, how it is explained to me, is the system would automatically activate on detection of smoke.
Yes.
So, got a detection system that picks up the smoke.
Yes.
It sends signals to a panel to set off a cause and effect.
Yes.
That would then be that if the system was working in environmental mode, those dampers would shut.
Yes. I'm going to stop you there, Mr. Whyte. I understand that.
Right, okay.
So let's go through it in stages. Smoke is detected.
Yes.
And that floor opens and everything else closes.
Yes.
Let's assume now that a fireman operates a yellow key switch on a different floor. So the fire started on floor 4, say, but the fireman uses his key switch on floor 6, say.
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay.
The way the system's designed to work is that then the system should move to extracting smoke from that floor, shouldn't it, instead?
My understanding of how that works, for that to even be able to occur, someone has to go to the main panel and insert a key.
Yes.
And turn it to on, I believe.
Yes.
It was. And at that point, someone could then go up and use the function. That function was described to me as a aid for firefighters after a fire had been extinguished to clear residual smoke from other areas of the building.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
My understanding of the use of that key is if smoke was still detected somewhere else, that would take precedence. That was my understanding.
I see. So you understood that even if they'd manually overridden the system to choose a different floor, the system would then still prefer a floor where smoke was detected again?
That was my understanding.
Right,
So, for instance, if
okay.
you went and pressed reset, it would reset the system. If smoke was still in the area, it would detect. That was my understanding of how
Yes.
it worked. And that would
Yes, and I
be
think
the floor.
yes, and I think what Dr. Lane's explaining is that if there'd been an override by the fire brigade, and you're right, that would mean changing something at the HMI panel first and then going to the yellow key switch. If that had happened, but then someone had at the HMI panel turned it from I think it's on to auto. At that point, it would revert to operating on the floor of original detection of smoke, not the floor that had been overridden. And I just want to check whether you understood that.
I didn't understand that, no.
Now, you tell us in your witness statement that JS Wright issued its practical completion letter to Ryden on the 18th of July 2016. And you tell us at paragraph 121 of your statement that from that point onwards, the TMO were responsible for the ongoing inspection, maintenance and testing of the system. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Hughes tells us in his witness statement that JS Wright was responsible for the maintenance and servicing of all the M&E systems for the duration of a 12-month defect liability period, which ran to the 4th of July 2017. And he tells us that that position was reached after a discussion between Steve Blake of Ryden and Paul Featherston, a director of JS Wright.
That's not my understanding.
What's your understanding then?
Quite clearly in all the documentation that JS Wright have submitted to Ryden's in form of practical completion certificates for various parts, it states that JS Wright would react to issues, but wouldn't, or I don't think, sorry, I'm just confusing myself here. When we're talking about the practical completions, we say maintenance is now down to other parties.
Yes.
When it actually come to our contractual obligations for that, there was some contention there. But our understanding of what we was to do was reactive maintenance. So therefore, if something occurred, like radiator was leaking, we'd send someone to site to investigate and repair.
Yes.
But as far as planned preventative maintenance, JS Wright at the time didn't have facility to provide that
Yes.
service.
I see. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
If we look at paragraph 190 of your statement at page 31, you say that you've seen a copy of an inspection and servicing certificate issued by Applied Protection. I think that should be Allied Protection.
Yes.
Dated the 17th of January 2017, stating that the AOVs had been serviced. It also states that cause and effects have been tested. And then you say, I'm not aware of any communication sent to JS Wright after that visit to indicate that there was any problem with the AOV system, except for an email received in June 2017 from Dave Hughes of Ryden. And that email was about the environmental system not working. Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
Yes. For the transcript, that's at JSW 304942. I don't think we need to turn it up. So what was being reported by Mr. Hughes was that the environmental mode of the system wasn't working. It was not operating on any floor, and you were being asked to investigate and remedy. Now, I just want to look at paragraph 32 of your second witness statement on page 5, JSW 407201. here you're explaining, I think, the interrelationship between the smoke control system and the environmental system and its functions. You say at 32, the smoke control system was activated in a different way. This was primarily via the lobby smoke detectors and the control elements supplied by PSB. The signals to operate the system in smoke mode were separate to the environmental function. When smoke mode was activated, this took priority over the environmental function, and the signals to operate the system in smoke mode were separate to the building management system. My understanding was that the only interface via the building management system when the system was operating in smoke mode was to close down the gas supply via the gas solenoid valve. Yes? So you're explaining that the two systems effectively have different functions and work independently, but there's that one interface with the building management system. Is that correct?
In effect, yes.
Yes. Now, can you answer this question? If the environmental system was not operating, as was reported before the fire, would you have expected that to have affected its ability to perform in smoke control mode?
If the system as a whole wasn't working, yes.
And in terms of the issue that was reported in June 2017 about the environmental part of the system, let's just look at what you say at paragraphs 196 to 198 of your statement, your first statement on page 33. You say, in 196, in environmental mode, the AOV system activated when preset temperature settings had been reached. I believe the activation temperature was set at 25 degrees Celsius based on an average of the temperatures recorded at 5 sensors within Grenfell Tower. Therefore, unless the external temperature reached that preset temperature, the environmental system would not activate and the dampers would not open. And then you say, I can only speculate, but based on the nature of the defect and the evidence provided by the photographs, I would suggest that the internal temperature had not reached 25 degrees Celsius, and therefore the environmental system had not activated. And then you say, I don't know whether the 1st of June 2017 was a hot day, but it's possible that it was, and someone expected the environmental system to be operating. But no matter how hot people may have felt, the system could not and would not have activated until the internal temperature was at or above the preset operational temperature. So there, you're saying, based on what you saw about this defect with the environmental system, you think it's possible that it wasn't working because the internal temperature had not reached 25 degrees Celsius. Is that correct?
That is correct. And since I've made this statement and having a look at various documents, there was another sensor external to the building as well. And if the external temperatures reached a preset temperature, the system wouldn't have activated either. The idea being there that you don't want to pull hot air on a summer's day into a building, compounding the issue of overheating corridor spaces.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're right about all of that, would that be likely to have had any impact on the system operating correctly in smoke control mode?
No.
No. Now, finally, I just
Are we
want
going to a new topic, Ms. Grange?
Yes, sorry, I was just going to mention this. I literally have one more document I want to take Mr. Whyte to and a couple of questions, and then I've finished my pre-prepared questions. So,
We can call that 10 minutes minimum, can we?
No, I don't think it's even going to be anything like that. I'm not sure if it's even going to be 5 minutes. I think it's going to be 2 minutes.
Right. Well, Mr. Whyte, we normally stop for a break at this time of day because it's good to have some lunch. But I imagine you'd like to complete your evidence this side of lunch, even if it means sitting a bit longer, would you?
That would suit me if it does everyone else.
I thought it might, yes. There will have to be another delay when Miss Grange reaches the end of her questions, for reasons I'll explain when we get there. But if you think it's only going to be 5 or 10 minutes, I think we should carry on. Happy to do that? Yes, all right, Miss Grange, carry on.
Yes. Can we just go to PSB 50166? This is a letter dated the 12th of June to J.S. Wright from Whyte and Son. This is effectively from PSB, because Whyte is their parent company, to Anthony Wilmot on the 12th of June, providing, at Mr. Wilmot's request, a quote for PSB to attend for a one-off visit. And we can see from the emails that this quote was sent to you on the 12th of June to ask how you wanted to proceed. That email's at RYD 3092630. And my questions are, do you recall receiving this quote for a one-off visit?
Yes.
And what did you do with it? What action did you take when you received the quote?
Sent it over to our aftercare guys.
Yes.
Can I briefly explain something?
Yes, of course.
Okay. PSB finished their works, as we've seen on paperwork when I signed off what is a practical completion document.
Yes.
Our J.S. Wright's practical completion was at a later date.
Yes.
What that gives is a band from the end of PSB's defect liability and the end of J.S. Wright's. Defect was reported to get PSB, the expert specialist, down to site. A purchase order needs to be raised. I thought the best way to do that, trying to assist J.S. Wright aftercare, was send them down there to do maintenance, a 6-monthly maintenance visit, to actually go through the system to see if there is any issues at all. That was the idea behind this.
I see.
Is
And what happened with
Miss
that?
Grange, forgive my interruption, but you say this was a proposal for a one-off.
Sorry, yes, I realised that. I think that's a mistake in my notes. So it says...
Well, this looks as though it's...
it's proposals for the preventive maintenance contract.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologise. And then he says, so that's a quote for a maintenance contract by PSB. So that's what you've just explained.
Yeah, there was further correspondence about this, where this was for a year, 2 visits. We only needed 1 visit, so we'd asked the question, or I believe J.S. Wright asked the question in PSB, would it be as simple as dividing the cost in half to have 1 visit?
Right,
Yeah,
I see.
which would
Yes.
cover the project for 6 months, taking
Yes.
it past the defect liability period, for our liability to respond to a defect,
Yes.
not for planned preventive maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as far as you were concerned, you passed this quote on, did you, to who? Can you remember?
It would have been to, dear Sir Madams, I'm not entirely sure if it was addressed to me. I think I'd instigated this quote being generated, and then suggested that it could be slashed in half. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that J.S. Wright Aftercare that would have been following this through and actually raising the purchase order for this
Right, yes.
would have been copied in, CC'd, and
Yes. Okay. But
be the
you-
ones taking action. Sorry.
And you can't help what happened thereafter. I mean, it's not very long before the fire, very close to the fire, but you don't know what happened to this.
I don't.
No.
I don't.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've come to the end of my pre-prepared questions.
Right, thank you very much. Well, now, Mr. Whyte is indicating when Council gets to the end of her questions, I'm afraid it's not quite the end of the ordeal, because we have to have a short break to enable her just to check there's nothing's gone adrift, and also to allow others who are not present in the room but are following the proceedings to suggest further questions that perhaps we ought to ask you. So we're going to break now. I'm going to say, is 10 minutes long enough, Miss Grange?
We think 10 minutes. 10 minutes is fine.
Right.
Yes.
We'll break now till 1:15. Then you come. We'll get you back then, and we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Thank you.
All right. So would you like to give the usher, please?
Cheers.
All right. 1:15 then, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you ask Mr. Whyte to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Whyte. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Grange?
Yes, no, Mr. Chairman, no further questions. And thank you very much for letting me sit into the lunch break.
That's all right.
I really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Mr. Whyte for coming and helping us this morning. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
Yes, and I should thank you very much, Mr. Whyte, on behalf of all the members of the panel. It's been really useful to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure it's been inconvenient to you to come and spend the morning here, but it's been of great help to us, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now it is the time to go. All right, so you go with the ushers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now, Ms. Grange, that's time to break, I'm sure.
It is, and those are all the witnesses we have today. It's just one. So we have the afternoon off, and then we start with some gas factual witnesses on Monday.
Right, thank you very much. Well, afternoon off really means an afternoon opportunity to do some other work, probably.
I think we're all quite busy on the
All right.
inquiry.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll break at that point and resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much.